He was sitting on an iron bed in a dirty cell, waiting to die. No one leaves this place alive. Here, in the Gestapo chambers, hundreds of people a day disappeared without trace. He was to be one of them. The bolts creaked. Horrified, he realized this is the end. Now, these people will raise their guns. Then, there will be a command, and it will be over. He didn't know what to do next. And for the last time, he gazed at his murderers. The men with guns didn't respond. The glassy-eyed guards stood there mesmerized. And then he understood it all. He took a step forward, then another one. He carefully closed the cell door. And then, with calm, balanced pace, he walked out through prison corridors. That day, the prisoner 3056 managed the impossible. He'd become the first condemned man to leave the Gestapo walls unscathed, in front of dozens of dazed German soldiers. They seemed to have forgotten who they were and what they needed to do. But it wasn't an accident. It was down to a Jewish prisoner called Wolf Messing. He could read minds, subordinate people to his will, and foresee the future. He knew how to die and resurrect. He foresaw World War II, predicted Hitler's suicide, and called the exact date of Stalin's death. Wolf Messing, the great cursed prophet. He foresaw the deaths of millions of innocent people, but managed to prevent none of them. He had to watch his beloved wife die and was powerless. He possessed a phenomenal gift. A gift which brought him great fame, but ruined his life. (1939), outskirts of Berlin. His feet were giving way while he was walking through the carriage. For a few days after his escape from the Gestapo, he had been hiding on roofs, eating very little. He couldn't sleep, and now he felt exhausted. He wanted only one thing: to wake up somewhere far from here, in a warm and safe place. But Messing knew that at any moment he could be seized. A huge reward was put on his head: 20,000 Reichsmark. With this money, one could buy a plane, not only a life of a criminal. And now, to save himself, he had to run and hide, as he had done so many years ago. Your ticket, sir? (1910), outskirts of Warsaw. The light of a flashlight blinded him. Wolf remained silent. He had no ticket, no money, or any warm clothes. He wanted only one thing: not to be found and returned home. Wolf could no longer remain in his native village, where no one loved him, where he was considered crazy. And all because of his strange visions that didn't let 11-year-old Messing live in peace. He saw some strange things. His neighbor's cow dying and the fire in the middle of the village. They laughed at him. But then his prophecies started to come true, and his life turned into hell. They called him Warlock and tried to stay away from him. His father tried to remove these stupid fantasies by force. His mother was kind but very ill. He had 4 brothers. Their father was very cruel. He beat them for no good reason, and if they complained, he beat them even harder. He believed that if they allowed themselves to be beaten, they were weak in spirit, so he was trying to turn them into little animals. Unable to withstand the constant beatings, he ran away without a single penny or any idea where to go to or what to do next. He boarded the next train to Berlin. He hoped to reach the final destination without difficulty. And now he was squinting from the flashlight, realizing with horror that he had nothing to tell the conductor. The scared guy started to look around helplessly. What should he do? His eyes focused on a scrap of newspaper. Not knowing what he was doing, Wolf picked up a dirty piece of paper and handed it to the conductor, hoping he would think it was his ticket. He prayed that he would just punch it and leave. He was repeating these words in his head. He was shaking with fear. The conductor examined the scrap of newspaper and stretched out his hand to him. Wolf heard the conductor's calm voice. "If you have a ticket, then why are you hiding?" Wolf couldn't believe his ears. How could this happen? Did the conductor believe him? We're talking about a version of Ericksonian hypnosis, gypsy hypnosis, instant hypnosis. Such things exist, and they're being investigated. The main idea is that because of great excitement, the man believes in what he's doing. He mustn't think that he's deceiving someone or suggesting an idea. I believe a fraud would be immediately detected, but stimulating others with my faith works phenomenally. It had never happened to Wolf before. Sometimes he had seen pictures of the future, but for the first time, he had put his thoughts into another person's mind. What should he do with this gift? Tell someone and risk being ridiculed or being called a warlock again? Wolf feared this the most. Therefore, he decided to find a simple job in Berlin. If he's lucky, he'll get a normal job. And he'll never again speak of his visions and his gift that brings only trouble. However, his dreams were not destined to be realized. In Berlin, there were a huge number of unemployed young people like him. The patrol sent them to orphanages, and so Wolf had to hide again. He ended up a beggar. He could only find occasional work, but Messing regretted nothing. He would do anything not to go back home. He was walking down the street. His head was spinning. He hadn't eaten anything for several days. The dirty beggar was driven away from stores. People on the streets turned away in disgust. He couldn't bring himself to ask for charity. He was pleading with his eyes, but no one responded. He leaned heavily against the wall. His head was swimming, and then everything went dark. 1913, Berlin. On that day, it was overcrowded in the local circus. The room was filled with noise. People were screaming and clapping their hands, watching the amazing show on stage. This number was called The Living Dead. In the middle of the arena lay a dead man. His skin was pale and his heart wasn't beating. Still, he showed no signs of decay. People from all over Europe would come to have a look at this wonder of nature. And no one knew that this wonder of nature was the 14-year-old Jewish beggar, Wolf Messing. His Living Dead act became the hit of the year. He didn't have to do much, just lie there 3 times a week without breathing or heartbeat. It seemed no one was capable of that. No one except Messing. He was lying in a coffin, listening to the cries of the audience, applause and delight. He started to get used to his amazing talent to die and to revive again. The first time it happened a few years before, he came round in a Berlin hospital. The whole council of physicians gathered around him. Wolf couldn't understand what had happened. Why were these people looking at him with such fear? Only then, Messing learned that he had been rushed to the hospital in an unconscious state. He wasn't breathing. There was no pulse or heartbeat. The doctors certified him dead, and his body was taken to the mortuary. He stayed there for several days. They'd already prepared him for cremation when one of the attendants noticed that his hand was moving. The scared medic called his colleagues. Only later, they found out that Wolf had had a cataleptic shock. In this state, the body loses the primary signs of life. The heartbeat becomes weak, barely audible, and the breath can hardly be felt. That's why it seems that a person is dead. He had been driven to this state by the constant hunger and fatigue. But now he was able to cause it himself and make good money from it in the circus. Having fallen into a state of catalepsy, he was sleeping for 3 days, and people would come. So he received 5 marks per day. He was like a stone, like a dead body. Then, gradually, his fingertips began to return to life. Over time, he was able to make a movement. His first work was the beginning of his future career as the Great Messing. A few years later, the entire world would speak of Wolf's extraordinary abilities. Thousands would dream to see a man who could read minds, find hidden objects, and foresee the future. But he would live to bitterly regret breaking his old promise and revealing his gift to others. His gift would become his most terrible curse. In 1937, Berlin. He was walking down the street with a smile on his face. There were still a few hours before the show, so Messing decided to take a stroll. This once hostile, strange city finally accepted him. Yes, he could be proud of himself. The ridiculed Jewish teenager had become a star. Messing heard the sound of a horn and with a laugh jumped onto the sidewalk. What carelessness! His head was swimming. Messing looked ahead. Suddenly, he saw a strange picture. The familiar street had been transformed. People were running, women were screaming, children were crying. People in an unfamiliar uniform were driving them like cattle. Shots rang out, and Messing came to his senses. He was still standing in the same place. The terrible vision vanished. He saw people on the streets buying bread, playing with children, engaging in everyday life. And they paid no attention to the man who had just seen their future. Within 2 years, there would be hardly anyone left alive in the Jewish quarter of Berlin. Half would be killed during detention, the rest sent to die in concentration camps. Messing's vision would come true, but he himself would not witness it. He would soon be first on the Third Reich's death list of enemies. But the overwhelmed Messing didn't know this. He had long been standing in the middle of the street, trying to come to his senses. Wolf couldn't understand what this vision meant. The only thing he really wanted was to forget about it. I believe that people endowed with phenomenal abilities, including Wolf Messing, are due to pay a huge price. It's the pendulum theory. The pendulum swings to the left and to the right. So the more creative a person is, such as Wolf Messing, the greater the compensation will be. That day, he would make his first mistake ever at the show. And then another and another. He would find it harder to concentrate, and it would be because of the sleepless nights that were driving him crazy. The terrible visions were coming again and again. He saw a huge line of people, women and children. They were moving slowly toward a huge barrack. Everyone looked the same, dressed in prison rags with a hexagram sewed on their chests. Who are these people and where are they going? With horror, Wolf looked into the future and shuddered. On the other side of the barrack, soldiers were disposing of hundreds of dead bodies. There was no escape from this house. But people kept going without knowing it. These visions had been haunting him for 2 long years. And now, in the middle of the room, he stood thinking only of how to interpret these visions. It was at this moment he received the last piece of the puzzle. The prophet froze. The images that had been emerging before him for months finally formed a complete picture. And the clue was a terrible name: Adolf Hitler. The man who seized power in Germany and was preparing for the most hideous crimes. Yes, there will be a war. A lot of people will die. But Hitler will be defeated. In his heart, he immediately felt bitter. He did what he had to do and revealed his visions. And now, he felt as if he was awakening from one nightmare to immerse himself into another. Messing's prophecy became a sensation. The next morning, it was all the newspapers wrote about, and tickets for the next show were sold out within an hour. People were eager to hear details about the future war, but few realized that Messing would never appear on stage again. His new home would be a Gestapo prison, and his only possible salvation, to flee to the USSR. 1939, outskirts of Berlin. He was making his way through the carriage, barely moving his feet. A few days before, he was arrested by the Gestapo. His execution was inevitable. And yet, he had achieved the impossible. He escaped and walked out of the prison in the middle of the day, in front of dozens of armed soldiers. Messing couldn't remember when he last ate. He felt powerless and exhausted. His hands trembled. He only wanted to sit in the compartment and get some sleep. Your ticket, sir? Well, now he knew exactly what to do. Once, on the train, as a little boy, he first discovered his gift of hypnosis. And whenever necessary, he could always use it. Since then, many times he regretted revealing his gift to others. Otherwise, he wouldn't have had to run away and hide, or fight for his life every minute. But it was too late. He could not change anything. The only thing that was left was to run as far away as possible. Flee to the only country that seemed safe to him, the USSR. Wolf didn't know what awaited him there, in distant Russia, but he saw no other choice. Men in uniform were running to him across the platform. Nearby, he heard a piercing train whistle. Messing was petrified. "Your papers, please." He was looking at the men in uniform and didn't know what to do, what to say, how to answer. Time seemed to have stopped. He only had two options. The first was to call himself a refugee and show his fake documents. Wolf Messing would disappear forever. Instead, he will be a simple man, a hard worker, who will settle in a village and live a quiet, peaceful life. He will marry a beautiful woman, have children, and die among them, old and happy. But there was another option, to tell the truth and risk his life once again. He would run scared, but he wouldn't have to hide his talent. If he's lucky, he will get an incredible burden off his chest. Perhaps here in the USSR, they will listen to him and believe him. He will tell them about his visions of a war that was inexorably approaching. Perhaps he might be able to help save people, himself included. And so he made a decision. I am Wolf Messing. Watch next. A death test in front of Joseph Stalin. At the times when magicians and prophets are being wiped out in the Soviet Union, he teaches hypnosis to the NKVD officers. Messing precisely foretold the start and end dates of World War II, the time of Stalin's death, and the end of his only dearest person. He passionately fought for the life of his beloved wife. But having realized that he was powerless, he cursed his gift, which brought him worldwide fame, but ruined his life. – 1939, Moscow. He walked along the long Kremlin corridor. His heart was pounding. His fate was at stake, and whether he lived or died depended on his abilities. Wolf strained. He concentrated his gaze at the soldiers, and they froze. A moment later, they saluted him, as if he were a general or the leader himself. Wolf had fulfilled Comrade Stalin's task and proved that Wolf Messing is not a fraud. He must live and be free. Messing closed the door behind him and caught Stalin's eyes. The leader pretended to quietly smoke his pipe. But Messing realized that passing freely through the 3 posts of the Kremlin guards had made a tremendous impact.
Stalin его встретил хмуро, так из-под лобья. Но дело в том, что у Сталина
Stalin met him gloomily, with a sullen look.
такого типа людям, потому что он знал, что у Гитлера.
But the point is that Stalin was interested in this type of person, because he knew that Hitler had Erich Jan Hanussen, his own psychic.
Есть свой ясновидящий.
So he wanted to have his own too, if he was a real psychic. Finally, the leader couldn't help it. How did you do it? I made the guards believe that I'm Beria. Messing was nervous. He watched every move of the leader. Stalin silently put his pipe aside and then laughed like a child. Messing was saved. Stalin had believed in his supernatural powers. He was eager to save the prophet's life and listen to him. Wolf warned him that a war will break out in 2 years. He even named the exact date, June the 22nd. He tried to describe in detail what he had seen in his visions. But suddenly, he was interrupted. Go, Comrade Messing. We will call for you. Messing didn't know the reason for this strange, even ironic reaction of the leader. He didn't know that in the same year, 1939, the USSR and Nazi Germany signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a secret document in which they agreed to fight the war as allies. Stalin had to conquer Latvia, Estonia, Finland, and half of Poland. Hitler promised to content himself with Lithuania and west of Poland. No wonder Stalin didn't believe Messing's warning. He was convinced that Hitler won't attack his ally. Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler were not like other people. As men, they were quite emotional, quite anxious, and filled with strict logic, but also all sorts of mystic beliefs. I believe that Stalin was just like any person, vulnerable, sensitive, and quite emotional. But most importantly, he had this magical thinking known as syncretic thinking. I guess he could have believed Wolf Messing, but didn't accept what he had said with his consciousness. 1941, Moscow. Messing wandered the streets of Moscow like a crazed man and didn't know what to do with himself. That beautiful morning, everything was as usual. People hurrying to work, happy pupils being late for lessons. He had been waiting for this day for so long, and here it was, June the 22nd, 1941. He couldn't remember how long he had been sitting, rocking like a madman. Messing felt that something had changed. His body tremors, as well as his headache, disappeared. He opened his eyes. Everything was the same. Was he wrong for the first time in his life? His thoughts were interrupted by a man's calm voice. It was coming from everywhere, filling all the space. Today, on June the 22nd, at 4 a.m., without declaration of war, the German army attacked our country. Panic seized the streets. And in this crazy whirlwind, nobody noticed a lonely man inconsolably crying on a bench. It had all come true. And he hadn't prevented it, hadn't helped. Risking his life, revealing everything to Stalin, had all been in vain. What did he need this gift for if it could not change the future? In desperation, he seemed not to notice the uniformed men approaching him and taking him to the familiar cabinet, where Stalin and others were already waiting. They asked him many questions, but the more Messing talked, the angrier everyone grew. 4 years. The war will last 4 long years. It all merged into one terrible moment that Messing didn't want to remember. He just wanted to be left alone and never be asked anything ever again. But it was not to be. He met with Stalin from time to time. Once, while they were having a conversation, their eyes stopped on a fly. The fly shrunk and fell down. Stalin said to Messing, "Did you kill it?" He replied, "Yes." "So you can kill?" He said, "I cannot kill. I only killed an insect, which was interrupting our conversation. But actually, I cannot kill. I'm opposed to this." Stalin didn't like his answer, but said nothing. 1941, Novosibirsk. Messing was walking along the corridors of the secret institute, not knowing whether to feel happy or sad. Now he lived here, in Novosibirsk. Officially, he was expelled. But in fact, he had a secret mission. It was entrusted to him by Comrade Stalin personally. Messing didn't want to do it. But refusal would mean signing his own death sentence. Of course, he was related. The state security couldn't go past such a person, but judging by the way they treated him, he wasn't on their leash. In fact, he strongly believed that a psychic shouldn't take part in the investigation. It wasn't his business. This was investigators' work. There were a couple of psychics in the country, but a huge amount of crime. Only investigators could deal with it. He entered the room and said hello. In response, there was a harmonious chorus of voices. These were his students, the future secret agents. He had to teach them hypnosis. It's hard to believe, but according to declassified materials, in 1930 in the NKVD, a special department was created where they studied telepathy, telekinesis, and extrasensory perception. They were creating special helmets that could transfer one person's thoughts to another from a distance. And it was there that Wolf Messing taught young talents hypnosis. The lesson went according to plan. Messing called a volunteer to show students how hypnosis worked. Suddenly, he felt dizzy. Messing saw a blood-stained, maimed body. Wolf knew that in 1 month, this man will be taken prisoner, undergo inhuman tortures, and die. Messing looked at the class. The students were turning into scary ghosts. This one will soon be burnt alive in a car. This one will be surrounded and have a bullet shot through his forehead. And that one, without any evidence, will be called a spy, will be tortured until he confesses, and then will be shot. He said, "Do you think it's easy to know people's future? It's very difficult to be Messing." These were his exact words. "Do you think it's easy to know about the troubles awaiting people? And I know them, but I don't tell them. Let them live happily." He walked briskly home after class. He hurried, as if running away from himself. His gift, his damned gift. How to put an end to this torture. How not to see people's deaths. He felt hurt and incredibly sorry. Back then, on the platform, he had chosen this path. The hard path of a man who sees the future, but can change nothing. Immersed in his own thoughts, he didn't notice himself running into a woman. "Excuse me, I didn't notice you." He was about to leave, but he suddenly felt choked up. A ringing laughter, a plain white dress, and those eyes. The eyes of a woman who was gazing at him. Messing was amazed. He had never seen such visions, and then he realized he saw his own future. And this woman was to become his future. A few months later, they would get married. The ceremony would be simple. Only a few guests, colleagues of the groom and relatives of the bride. But this event would change the entire life of Wolf Messing. Ada Rappaport would become everything for Messing, his wife, assistant and friend. After meeting this woman, no one would ever see Wolf gloomy again. It seemed Ada breathed new life into him, to show that there is happiness, and then to take it away for good. How can you live with someone who reads your thoughts? She said, "I don't have any bad thoughts." They lived in friendship, and he felt great support. They were coming back home after the show when Ada started the same conversation again. She wanted children. Why does her husband resist? Messing was too tired to argue. They won't have children, period. He doesn't want his gift to be passed on to his children. This is too terrible. Ada suddenly turned pale, staggered, and fell. Wolf grabbed her. The world was spinning before his eyes. He saw his Ada, pale and sullen, lying in a hospital bed. Her face was distorted with pain. She was dying. When his wife came round, Messing was sitting next to her smiling. Ada had been working too much. She needs more rest. He couldn't tell her the truth, to say that cancer was uncontrollably growing inside her body. He didn't want to think about it. There is time to change the future for the first time in his life. And he will, he must fix it. Because he wouldn't survive her death. (1953) Moscow. Stalin was working at his dacha when the door of his cabinet opened. The leader stopped. At the door stood Wolf Messing. He threw himself at Stalin's feet, begged to let him and his wife go abroad. Only there, doctors could operate on his Ada. This is their only chance for salvation. For the first time in his life, Messing was begging. But in vain. Nothing could touch the leader. Stalin wasn't going to let him go. The USSR borders were blocked even for Messing. Finally, Wolf stopped. Devastated, defeated. He couldn't do anything. Well, in this case, there is nothing to lose. You will die on this day, Joseph Vissarionovich. Messing knew how terrible it is to be frightened and helpless, unable to avert your own death. He also knew that he was risking his life. At any moment, Stalin could throw him behind bars. He knew it, but had no fear. He didn't care anymore. He was cursing his talent. He was cursing his own life. A life which, after his wife's death, would have no meaning. On March the 5th, 1953, Stalin indeed died. In his prime, he had no specific abnormalities. According to one version, he died of a brain hemorrhage. The other says of poison, poured with the hands of his closest associates. Messing's prophecy would come true, but it wouldn't bring relief to the prophet himself. 1960, Moscow. He entered his wife's ward. Ada looked amazingly pale and exhausted. He saw how difficult it was for her to smile. He called every doctor in the region to visit her. They tried to calm him down. They told him, "Wolf Grigorovich, you know there are some cases where the disease takes a different turn. There is a possibility that she will recover." He says, "Who are you telling this? I'm Wolf Messing. I know the day and the hour of her death." With a lump in his throat, he forced himself to speak. He said that he had seen a strange vision. They are old and they have grandchildren. And there are children nearby. Yes, the children she wanted so much. They will be born. Her dream will come true. Her exhausted face relaxed, brightened, and Wolf couldn't hold himself back. He ran out of the ward. He was choking with tears. He couldn't cry in front of her. He wanted her to die with a smile on her face. He was paying for his talent. Ada's enormously deep loss made him feel as though he was now paying for his glory and happiness. The pendulum had swung. The greater the passion you experience, the more you suffer when it is suddenly taken away. Moscow, 1961. Messing was lying in the dust among old photographs. It was 9 months since he had buried his wife. All this time, he hadn't left his apartment, switched his TV on, or read newspapers. He tore his show posters to pieces. He cursed the gift which had ruined his life. He only wanted to die. To finally be with her. With Ada. He already knew when and how it would happen. Artery blockage, lungs and kidney failure. He saw it and wanted it to happen as soon as possible. Nearby, he heard a piercing train whistle. Messing looked back. He was standing on the platform, staring into the eyes of the men in uniform, smoking and thinking what to say, how to answer. Time seemed to have stopped. It was only him and his choices. To become a simple man, to renounce his gift. Here on the dirty platform, he had to choose his future life. Messing put out a cigarette and smiled at the frozen soldiers. He had decided. I am Wolf Messing.